Welcome to the Secret Resume podcast, hosted by me, Melody Moore. In this podcast, we explore the people, places and experiences that have shaped my guests, those which have influenced who they are as people and where they are in their work life today, or as I like to call it, their secret resume. This is a different kind of podcast to my usual, where I usually interview guests. I've done 22 episodes so far of the Secret Resume podcast, and I've learned an enormous amount from talking to some really amazing and interesting guests. And I thought it would be interesting to try and understand and share some of the key themes and key messages that I have picked up and that regular listeners will have listened to across all of those 22 podcasts. So I identified a number of different themes, actually, that seem to come up time and time again. So I thought it might be fun to do some short episodes where I share some clips and some thoughts on the different themes that are coming up. So this is the first of those episodes. Really happy to be doing this and excited. And the first one is around authenticity or self-identity. So identity and authenticity, those seem to be quite key themes for a number of my guests. There were definitely some themes even within the theme of authenticity and identity. And one of those was around connecting with your own identity and feeling able to be open about your identity and the impact of hiding your identity. And we're going to first hear from my guest Resh, who talks about her experience of hiding sexual orientation from family and from colleagues.
Yeah, I grew up in Southampton, a very small Indian community where everyone knew everyone. My parents are very integrated into the Indian community. So growing up, as a teenager, yes, I knew that I wasn't probably going to marry an Indian guy, and I was just trying to put it off. And I'd get, my parents would get phone calls. It was like, okay, my parents, don't get me wrong, they're not traditional Indian people. They weren't like, we've got to have an arranged marriage or anything like that. They just wanted to see me settle down with an Indian boy. In my head, I thought, how the am I going to get out? How am I going to get out of this? And for me, I thought, okay, if I leave. So when I went to uni in London, I thought, okay, this is my escape. I'm never going to go back to Southampton. I can live in London, be who I want to be. No one needs to know. I thought short term, but not long term into how I was going to do this. And as time went on, I was then sort of in my 30s and I met Hina, and I thought, this feels real. This is the time I've got to now present my true self, because I was living a lie for 35 years of my life. No one that was close to me actually really knew me. They didn't know the real me. They just knew Resh, fun loving, let's go out, But from my core, no one got to know me because I was never going to be truthful with you.
What did it feel like to constantly not be able to tell the truth about yourself?
It's really difficult because you're lying about everything, everything. You're lying about what you did last night, what you did at the weekend, where you went on holiday, who you went on holiday with. Everything became a lie. And now it's like, who was I trying to protect? Because it wasn't protecting me in any way. It was damaging me to my core. So, yeah, I can't believe I was that person sometimes. When I look back, I can't believe I was behaving like that.
We can hear there the pain and the struggle that Resh had with hiding her identity. She does talk later on in the episode about reconnecting to her identity and living much more openly in an open way. And there's a real theme through many of these interviews about disconnection and reconnection with our identities. And in this next clip, My guest Tola talks about what caused her and helped her reconnect to her African heritage, particularly through her involvement and, in fact, running of the META programme, which is a high potential programme for ethnic minorities in the civil service.
META, for example, was a significant one where I was thrust with and collaborated with a group of ethnic minority leaders who were strong in their own way. And we would talk about identity. That was one of the things that we wanted to talk about. And of course, I had to talk about that myself. So in talking about that myself and helping people to share their own experience of that has helped me reclaim that. Because when people would say, why don't you say your full, why don't you ever say your full name? And that was, or why do you use an English name? And, all of these types of questions, you'll be able to do that in a safe space. And it made you really think about that. And so that's when I decided, that I would introduce myself. And I said to people, when I'm going to go on Meta, I'm going to introduce myself as Omatola Oluwafumilaya Ayola, because that is my name. My mum gave me Omatola, my grandmother gave me Oluwafumilaya, and it means something, in our tradition. So why aren't I claiming it? It's all of that.
We hear a similar story from Nadia, who talks about how she initially rejected and then re-engaged with her Sri Lankan heritage.
In 1992, I was one of 3 ethnic minority girls. It's an all-girls school, so ethnic minority girls in a sea of white middle class. And yeah, it was tough in a number of ways, constantly feeling like I had to try to fit in. Maybe even not quite having a full voice in the room because of it, I would say. But definitely, I wasn't shy to put up my hand. I would, contribute in class. But there was certainly groups of girls where I didn't really feel comfortable. They had something in common that was definitely not something that I had in common with them. And I don't think I quite put, I was obviously 12, 13, 14, wouldn't quite put my finger on it at the time, but I just knew I wasn't comfortable and I didn't feel accepted necessarily. And I felt that a few times in my life, but for sure, school is a unique place and unique time in your life where you can really, and it's a hard time because you're a teenager and you're uncomfortable in yourself anyway, and you still don't really know who you are. But yeah, I did my absolute best to fit in, and I think I did it in a way that almost let go of my Mauritian heritage. I let go of my Mauritian heritage, and I didn't know I'd done it. So it was completely unconscious, but I was so wanting to assimilate to this white environment that I just ignored and thought, well, if I just ignore the fact that I have brown skin, then maybe that will help me to belong. And bizarrely, and this is a very strange story as I say it out loud, but I didn't realize what I had done and how much I'd let go of my, I'm going to say brownness, and I just mean, just me as a Mauritian woman, until my early 30s. So I just did not associate with being an ethnic minority for about 15 to 20 years of my life. And I say that with a smile because it is a bit strange, but I just didn't want to, because if I acknowledge my difference, then that means that people will see me differently, and I just wanted people to see me like everyone else. Of course, that isn't true. Of course, they would still see my difference, but that was my logic. I just wanted to belong, and so I just didn't want people to see. So I tried to act and be as white as possible.
We then start talking about one of the triggers that caused Nadia as an adult to start really thinking about her heritage again.
And there was a specific moment, maybe it was late 20s now thinking about it, but when the founder of the company came into the room where I was sitting, and he was like, we're putting in a tender for some work, and it's specifically for like a positive action ethnic minority program. Are you okay for me to refer to you as an ethnic minority consultant? And it really took me aback because I paused for a moment, and it seems strange, but because I'd let go of that part of my identity, I actually had to process what he was saying and say, well, yes, because I am. But it felt so uncomfortable for me to acknowledge it. And it was that moment that I realized that I had completely let go of that part of my identity. But I didn't do anything about it at that point. I was just like, oh, that was interesting.
We then go on to talk about later in Nadia's life when she's working, where she starts to identify with and reconnect to her heritage. Or have you started behaving differently now that you're in a different headspace around it?
Yeah. It's probably subtle. Bearing in mind that I have practiced not being an ethnic minority for probably longer than I practiced being it, and acknowledging that part of my identity. But I absolutely acknowledge that part of my identity now. I very much welcome it. I'm very proud of it because it's my story. It's who I am. And obviously I started by sharing the story even before I was born. It started then. It started, before my mum. My story is the generations that came before me and all that they carry, and all the trauma that comes with being an ethnic minority person, even though I haven't personally experienced significant, like, trauma in the sense of how we might think of trauma, but it's generational trauma that I carry. And so I process it now. I've done a lot more, obviously, reading as a diversity, equity and inclusion practitioner, professional. Of course, I've done. So I have an understanding of how my ethnicity influences and impacts how the world interacts with me. So it's constantly there now. It's constant. So because I'm so attuned to that part of who I am, I'm much more aware of how it influences how people see me, how they view me, and how it influences my interactions.
Listening back to these, it really makes me think about authenticity and self-image and identity, and how we often talk about authenticity and identity as though they are a singular thing and as though they don't change. And I think what's really interesting, so many of these interviews and so many of these clips that I've been re-listening to, is it's clear how much our identity does shift and does change over time, both what we connect to, but also external aspects that influence our identity as well. Another core theme that came through when it came to identity and authenticity was around the loss of identity, things changing in someone's life that means that their identity was something maybe that they questioned or struggled with because of these external changes. We're going to start here with Ian, who talks about changes to his identity when he became a stay-at-home dad.
When you meet someone who earns more than you do, and that's not really why you're together, and it's just a feature of the relationship, I didn't really ever think about it. For me, it was less about ego, it was more about identity. So when I first started looking after Freya, she was 6 months old, sort of full time. So Lisa was at work Monday to Friday, wasn't working from home because, hey, who worked from home pre-2021 or so, 2020 and 2020. And so it was Freya and I, it was us making our own time, and she wasn't in nursery until 9 months. She was 16 months old when she went to nursery. So I had 9 months where it was looking after her, which was amazing. I did very much the same kind of pattern with Stuart. And so I remember people saying, well, what do you do? This is the classic conversation. What do you do? Oh, I'm a management consultant. I remember certainly answering, I'm a management consultant, which comes with it, as you know, it comes with loaded connotations in terms of, giving you a watch and telling your time and all these kind of things and sacking people, which actually was almost never happened in the sort of stuff I did. But I wasn't. Clearly, I wasn't. I was a full-time carer for a little girl who, had reflux. And so I was, we were managing that and, trying to help her to walk. And she was very, very slow at learning to walk. And that was kind of a feature of that. So I had this work identity being taken away. What I was quite fortunate with at the time was I had the opportunity to develop my hockey umpiring career. And so I was umpiring every Saturday. And so that would be my time. Having looked after Freya during the week, my time was to go away and to do that and to focus on that and have that as a kind of a little bit of a status piece. And after a number of years, Freya would have been about 5, Struan would have been 2 when I became a National League hockey umpire. So it's a level 3 umpiring in the English structure. But building up to that, you had a certain degree of authority. So you'd have the shirt and I have a shirt with a name, my surname on the back and all those kind of little bits and pieces. And I think in some ways that sense of status, maybe identity, I wasn't an umpire and a consultant. I was a dad and an umpire, and actually I was high enough up that it meant something a little bit more. And sometimes you meet people who played hockey and they go, "Oh, you're a proper umpire," or "Oh, you umpire up there." And so, well, I do, but it doesn't feel that different. But actually, there is a little bit of kudos around it. It's not that much kudos. I mean, ultimately, you're still a match official in sport. It's not like you might be helping elite players to play the game, but you're not the elite player yourself. You're just a facilitator. So I think it was, identity. I think identity more than ego. I mean, you get a lot of casual banter under the thumb. Is your wife paying this evening? Do you want to check if you're allowed to buy a round? All that kind of, friendly sort of stuff that was someone who perhaps was feeling a bit vulnerable in a male conversation, maybe would find that quite challenging, or find that they were feeling less of a man in inverted commas. Maybe it could be quite challenging. That kind of casual banter that men indulge in some men will find it more difficult to brush off or to absorb, kind of sort of absorb it and just sort of move on with it. I think, language does matter. It didn't matter to me because I was quite relatively early in that sort of solo care of Freya, and then Monday to Friday anyway, solo care. Then I got quite relaxed about, this is how it was at the moment.
We have a similar story with Ollie, who played rugby for England, and his experience of how his identity changed and struggling with that when he finished playing rugby.
Sport was my avenue for everything, every form of social interaction that I had, every form of validation, every form of praise, reward, recognition, everything. And then it was gone, and I couldn't execute at all anymore. And so now I was in a new world where I was having to sort of, if you like, develop a new skill, but had no credibility or no background in it whatsoever, and equally no idea about what that new skill was going to be.
Patricia, is there any support for that transition? You go from, being a famous rugby player, everything around you, and then all of a sudden you're not. There's nothing there to support you.
No, there was nothing. No, I mean they're getting better now, but there's still relatively nothing. And I'll be honest, I mean, I have a bit of sympathy for them because it's very difficult. I mean, what can you do? When you've driven a Ferrari, it's very difficult to turn around and say, "Oh, like it's okay." Like, life, you can still go from A to B, but here's your Skoda or whatever. That's not a discredit to a Skoda. I just don't know what other car to say, right? So, I just think it's very difficult. There were lectures and seminars around preparing for life after rugby, but I mean, A, you think you're invincible, and B, you don't really want to consider that option, and C, it's just not a very desired conversation. But when it happens, the fall from grace is big. And actually, that's the one like negative side of that environment. And I think it's also the players do it themselves. Like, you deliberately ostracize yourself from that, let's call it family or that circle, because you feel like a fraud. You originally, give me the ball, I'll do this, I'll do that, I'll be able to, I'll score tries, I'll do whatever else. Now you can't deliver your specialism, but you're still trying to sort of be in the mixer and be one of the lads and whatever else. And you're not, you're outside the circle of trust now, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so instead of sort of being kept in it, some teams and whatever are good at that, but you as an individual as well, you're your own worst enemy. You deliberately ostracize yourself from that. Like, right, well, I'm going to go smash it somewhere else.
Do you question who you are? Because your identity's been so tied up with the sport for so long.
For 4 years, 5 years, actually longer. Even to this day, sometimes it happens. I still introduce myself. I would introduce myself as, "Hi, I'm Ollie. I used to play rugby." "Oh, who'd you play for?" "I played for Stade Francais, England." "Oh, I've seen you play." Blah, blah. "Oh, yeah, great. So it was everything like that, who I was before. Not like, "Oh, I'm a director at PwC now and I'm doing this and this and this." Because your perception, and probably the reality, right, is that's more boring. Because the perception is loads of people can go work for PwC or whatever else to get a job. But fuck, it'd be cool to play for England. Jesus, like, how'd you do that? So that's what you lead with. And that's because you want praise, recognition, people to think you're a legend and whatever else. You lead with that because you think it's going to give you the emotional gratification that you're seeking. And so that was me. That was me from the age of 29 to probably mid, 33, 34. That was how I led everything. And a lot of my decisions were driven by that. And if you like, I needed that praise, recognition, reward, love, attention, affection, because that was, if you like, that's what had been absent for me 10 to 20, but had been present for me from 20 to, let's say, 30. And I've become so dependent on it. And when it had gone, I needed it. I was so isolated and lost without it that I just desperately needed it. And I couldn't figure out, I wasn't mature enough and I was too driven by my own ego at that point to appreciate that I needed to do some self-reflection, that I needed to change some things.
Ollie then goes on to talk about a really quite challenging time in his life. The episode is well worth a listen, but we'll catch up with him again when he kind of hits rock bottom and realises he needs to reach out for help.
And so I rang up our players' union that we have called the RPA and just said, "Look, I don't know if you've got any support, but I think I'm in a pretty bad place. I think I need some help here around me. And because if I don't get this help now, I'm going to self-destruct. I'm not going to be the person that I want to be or that I aspire to be. And all that's going to happen is I'm going to end up hurting people. And, maybe next time it's, they will get pregnant, they will go through, and 3 years down the line, I'll cock it up. And then that'll be a proper disaster. That will be the pits for me. That will be, if you like, I don't know, is it the antithesis? I don't know what the word, but the total opposite of everything that I've ever aspired and hoped for. And if you like, everything that I ever longed for, having experienced it as a kid. Now I've got 3 children of my own and an incredible wife, an incredible family. The one thing that I want now is to be the best possible dad I can be for them. And I recognize that in order for me to achieve that and do that, I needed to do some massive self-reflection and some self-adjustment and reassessment and whatever else.
We heard from Ian and Ollie how external events have influenced their identity and having to find ways of reconnecting to and forming their identity, really. And what we hear from our next clip is Afolabi talking about how external events made him and helped him realize that perhaps more strongly connecting to his identity and using his knowledge and experience to speak out and to actually try and make change?
What I've been doing is helping my boys, who at this time, 7, 8, whatever, George Floyd. What I've been doing is helping them get stronger at dealing with the inappropriate stuff they're going to live with, right? What am I doing to actually challenge that inappropriate stuff out there with my voice? And it kind of, it came to me that, with the fortunate education I've had, with all of the love and support from my parents, being comfortable in my identity and where I come from, whatever, the stuff that I've been doing at work and the stuff that I've learned at Hay, like, I need to say something. It would be wrong of me not to be able to use that and draw on that. So it's not that I wouldn't help my boys, but I started to turn my voice outwards more, because I'm like, this ain't right. It's not about me helping them get stronger to deal with this. It's about, let's actually talk about some of this stuff as well. So that was, I think, a big, non-consciously, a big driver for the piece that I wrote, the blog. I'm not a writer. My middle brother is, but so that I just started banging, typing, and so when it comes to you, just go with it. You ride the wave. And when I look back and after doing it, I think that was a bit of getting me to sort of talk out there. And then obviously doing more of the work with Audrey and Rolando, that sort of added that as well. And, now I started to turn my voice a bit more outwards about some of this stuff, not necessarily with posts on LinkedIn, but even in work with other people or the work you're doing. Because, it's like, I'm not just going to say my boys need to get better at this. Like, that's nonsense,
We're going to finish this episode on authenticity and identity with a beautiful sentiment from Anjali, who earlier in the episode had talked about that feeling that she needed to be perfect in order to be loved, that her self-identity needed to be around perfection. And I asked her at the end of the episode if now, as an adult looking back, she still feels like that. You said earlier that when you were younger, you believed that you had to be perfect to be loved. And I just wonder what you think of that now, looking at it from a different space and time in your life.
Different space and time. I love that. Well, in this space and time, I guess, what I feel is that you're always perfect to somebody who truly loves you. And that's one way of telling whether they love you or not. I mean, I find that if I love someone, I don't want them to be any different. I want them to be who they are. So that's all I have to say about that.
So what did I learn from this experience of going back and listening again to some of the previous episodes? Well, one, that it reminded me that identity is complex, that it shifts and it changes, and our relationship with our identity changes, both due to external and internal drivers and factors. Also, that our perception of our identity influences our behaviour and the way that we choose to speak about it, but also potentially speak up for others. And the final thing is about not trying to be something that we're not, and actually getting in touch with who we truly are is something I'm really deeply passionate about, and trying to figure out who we really are. It's something I've been studying for the past 3 years, studying Being Me therapy. And I really loved Anjali's comment at the end about, really what she's saying is that being loved for who we are and not trying to be someone else is a beautiful thing. I just wanted to finish off by thanking all of my guests that have taken part so far in The Secret Resume. It's been an absolute dream for me to be hosting and interviewing people on this podcast, and hope you've enjoyed our first ever bonus episode where we're bringing together just little tasters and little clips on some of the key themes that we've identified. Do go and have a look at the long, full episodes of each of these clips. They're all fantastic. We'll include the links to them in the show notes. And do let us know what you think. If you have any thoughts on our bonus episode and things that you liked, maybe things that we could have done differently. And I look forward to catching up with you next week for the beginning of Series 5, where we are focusing on and interviewing people who are diversity, equity and inclusion leaders and experts. This podcast is brought to you by Liberare Consulting. If you enjoyed today's show, why not click on the subscribe button so you are among the first to hear about new episodes? And we would love for you to do us a favour and click on the share button and share this episode with one of your friends.